The Brahmin Girl That Married a Tiger, from the book Tales of Southern India in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Yoganandh. The Brahmin Girl That Married a Tiger by Lucas Cleave and Pandit Nadesa Shastri. In a certain village, there lived an old Brahmin who had 3 sons and a daughter. The girl, being the youngest, was brought up most tenderly and became spoilt, and so, whenever she saw a beautiful boy, she would say to her parents that she must be wedded to him. Her parents were therefore much put about to devise excuses for taking her away from her youthful lovers. Thus passed on some years, till the girl was very nearly grown up, and then the parents, fearing that they would be driven out of their caste if they failed to dispose of her hand in marriage before she came to the years of maturity, began to be eager about finding a bridegroom for her. Now, near the village there lived a fierce tiger that had attained to great proficiency in the art of magic and had the power of assuming different forms. Having a great taste for Brahmin's food, the tiger used to now and then to frequent temples and other places of public refreshment in the shape of an old famished Brahmin in order to share the food prepared for the Brahmins. The tiger also wanted, if possible, a Brahmin wife to take to the woods and there to make her cook his meals after a fashion. One day, when he was partaking of his meals in Brahmin shape at the Satra, footnote, a place of public feeding, end of footnote. He heard the talk about the Brahmin girl who was always falling in love with a very beautiful Brahmin boy. Said he to himself, "Praised be the face that I saw first this morning. I shall assume the shape of a Brahmin boy and appear as beautiful can be and win the heart of the girl." Next morning, he accordingly became in the form of a great Sastri, proficient in the Ramayana, and took his seat near the ghat of the sacred river of the village. Scattering holy ashes profusely over his body, he opened the Ramayana and began to read. "The voice of the new Sastri is most enchanting. Let us go and hear him," said some women among themselves, and sat down before him to hear him expound the great book. The girl for whom the tiger had assumed this shape came in due time to bathe at the river, and as soon as she saw the new Sastri, fell in love with him and bothered her old mother to speak to her father about him so as not to lose her new lover. The old woman too was delighted at the bridegroom whom fortune had thrown in a way, and ran home to her husband, who, when he came and saw the Sastri, raised up his hand in praise of the great god Maheshwara. The Sastri was now invited to take his meals with them, and as he had come with the express intention of marrying the daughter, he, of course, agreed. A grand dinner followed in honor of the Sastri, and his host began to question him as to his parentage, etc., to which the cunning tiger replied that he was born in a village beyond the adjacent wood. The Brahmin had no time to wait for further enquiries, and as the boy was very fair, he married his daughter to him the very next day. Feasts followed for a month, during which time the bridegroom gave every satisfaction to his new relatives, who supposed him to be human all the while. He also did full justice to the Brahmin dishes and swallowed everything that was placed before him. After the first month was over, the tiger bridegroom bethought him of his accustomed prey and hankered after his abode in the woods. A change of diet for a day or two is all very well, but to renounce his own proper food for more than a month was hard. So one day he said to his father-in-law, "I must go back soon to my old parents, for they will be pining at my absence. But why should we have to bear the double expense of my coming all the way here again to take my wife to my village? So, if you will kindly let me take the girl with me, I shall take her to a future home and hand her over to her mother-in-law and see that she is well taken care of." The old Brahmin agreed to this and replied, "My dear son-in-law, you are our husband, and she is yours, and we now send her with you, though it is like sending her into the wilderness with her eyes tied up. But as we take you to be everything to her, we trust you to treat her kindly." The mother of the bride shed tears at the idea of having to send her away, but nevertheless the very next day was fixed for the journey. The old woman spent the whole day in preparing cakes and sweetmeats for her daughter, and when the time for the journey arrived, she took care to place in her bundles and on her head 1 or 2 margosa leaves. Footnote: among high caste Hindus, when girls leave one village and go to another, the old woman of the house, the mother or grandmother, always places in her bundles and on her head a few margosa leaves as a talisman against demons. End of footnote. to keep her off demons. The relatives of the bride requested her husband to allow her to rest wherever she found shade and to eat wherever she found water, and to this he agreed, and so they began their journey. The boy tiger and his human wife pursued their journey for 2 or 3 gadikas. Footnote: a gadika is 24 minutes. The story being Hindu, the Hindu method of reckoning distance is used. End of footnote. In free and pleasant conversation, when the girl happened to see a fine pond round which the birds were warbling their sweet notes, she requested her husband to follow her to the water's edge and to partake of some cakes and sweetmeats with her. But he replied, "Be quiet, or I shall show you my original shape." This made her afraid. So she pursued her journey in silence until she saw another pond, when she asked the same question of her husband, who replied in the same tone. Now she was very hungry, and not liking her husband's tone, which she found had greatly changed ever since they had entered the woods, said to him, "Show me your original shape." No sooner were these words uttered than her husband's form changed from that of a man. 4 legs, striped skin, a long tail and a tiger's face came over him suddenly, and horror of horrors, a tiger and not a man stood before her. Not were her fears stilled when the tiger and human voice began as follows: "Know henceforth that I, your husband, am a tiger, this very tiger that now speaks to you. If you have any regard for your life, you must obey all my orders implicitly, for I can speak to you in human voice and understand what you say. In a couple of gatikas, we shall reach my home, of which you will become the mistress. In the front of my house, you will see 6 tubs, each of which you must fill up daily with some dish or other cooked in your own way. I shall take care to supply you with all the provisions you want." So saying, the tiger slowly conducted her to his house. The misery of the girl may be more imagined than described, for if she were to object, she would be put to death. So, weeping all the way, she reached her husband's house. Leaving her there, he went out and returned with several pumpkins and some flesh, of which she soon prepared a curry and gave it to her husband. He went out again after this and returned in the evening with several vegetables and some more flesh, and gave her an order: "Every morning I shall go out in search of provisions and pray, and bring something with me on my return. You must keep cooked for me whatever I leave in the house." So next morning, as soon as the tiger had gone away, she cooked everything left in the house and filled all the tubs with food. At the 10th gatika, the tiger returned and growled out, "I smell a man! I smell a woman in my wood!" And his wife, a very fair, shut herself up in the house. As soon as the tiger had satisfied his appetite, he told her to open the door, which she did, and they talked together for a time, after which the tiger rested a while and then went out hunting again. Thus passed many a day till the tiger's Brahmin wife had a son, which also turned out to be only a tiger. One day, after the tiger had gone out to the woods, his wife was crying all alone in the house, when a crow happened to pick at some rice that was scattered near her, and seeing the girl crying, began to shed tears. "Can you assist me?" asked the girl. "Yes," said the crow. So she brought out a palmyra leaf and wrote on it with an iron nail all her sufferings in the wood, and requested her brothers to come and relieve her. This palmyra leaf she tied to the neck of the crow, which, seeming to understand her thoughts, flew to a village and sat down before one of her brothers. He untied the leaf and read the contents of the letter and told them to his other brothers. All the 3 then started for the wood, asking their mother to give them something to eat on the way. She had not enough rice for the 3, so she made a big ball of clay and stuck it over with what rice she had, so as to make it look like a ball of rice. This she gave to the brothers to eat on their way, and started them off to the woods. They had not proceeded long before they espied an ass. The youngest, who was of a playful disposition, wished to take the ass with him. The 2 elder brothers objected to this for a time, but in the end they allowed him to have his own way. Further on, they saw an ant, which the middle brother took with him. Near the ant there was a big palmyra tree lying on the ground, which the eldest took with him to keep off the tiger. The sun was now high in the horizon, and the 3 brothers became very hungry. So they sat down near a tank and opened the bundle containing the ball of rice. To their utter disappointment, they found it to be all clay, but being extremely hungry, they drank all the water in the pond and continued their journey. On leaving the tank, they found a big iron tub belonging to the washerman of the adjacent village. This they took also with them, in addition to the ass, the ant, and the palmyra tree. Following the road described by their sister in a letter sent by the crow, they walked on and on till they reached the tiger's house. The sister, overjoyed to see her brothers again, ran out at once to welcome them. "My dearest brothers, I am so glad to see you that you have come here to relieve me after all, but the time for the tiger's coming home is approaching. So hide yourself in the loft and wait till he is gone." So saying, she helped her brothers to ascend into the loft. By this time the tiger returned and perceived the presence of human beings with a peculiar smell. He asked his wife whether anyone had come to their house. She said no. But when the brothers, who with their trophies of the way, the ass, the ant, and so on, were sitting upon the loft, saw the tiger dallying with their sister, they were greatly frightened, so much so that the youngest, through fear, began to quake, and they all fell on the floor. "What is all this?" said the terrified tiger to his wife. "Nothing," she said, "but your brothers-in-law. They came here a watch." Footnote: a watch is a yama or 3 yards. End of footnote. Ago, and as soon as you have finished your meals, they want to see you. "How can my brothers-in-law be such cowards?" thought the tiger to himself. He then asked them to speak to him, whereon the youngest brother put the ant which he had in his hand into the ear of the ass, and as soon as the latter was bitten, it began to bawl out most horribly. "How is that your brothers have such a hoarse voice?" said the tiger to his wife. He next asked them to show him their legs. Taking courage at the stupidity of the tiger on the 2 former occasions, the eldest brother now stretched out the palmyra tree. "By my father, I have never seen such a leg," said the tiger, and asked his brothers-in-law to show their bellies. The second brother now showed the tub, at which the tiger shuddered, and saying, "Such a harsh voice, so stout a leg, and such a belly, truly I have never heard of such persons as these," he ran away. It was already dark, and the brothers, wishing to take advantage of the tiger's terror, prepared to return home with their sister at once. They ate up what little food she had and ordered her to start. Fortunately for her, a tiger child was asleep. So she tore it into 2 pieces and suspended them over the hearth, and thus getting rid of the child, she ran off with her brothers towards home. Before leaving, she bolted the front door from inside and went out at the back of the house. As soon as the pieces of the cub, which were hung up over the hearth, began to roast, they dripped, which made the fire hiss and splutter. And when the tiger returned about midnight, he found the door shut and heard the hissing of the fire, which he mistook for the noise of cooking muffins. Footnote: Tamil, dosai. End of footnote. "I see," said he to himself, "how very cunning you are. You have bolted the door and are cooking muffins for your brothers. Let us see if we can't get your muffins." So saying, he went round to the back door and entered his house, and was greatly perplexed to find his cup torn in 2 and being roasted, his house deserted by his Brahmin wife, and his property plundered. For his wife, before leaving, had taken with her as much of the tiger's property as she could conveniently carry. The tiger now discovered all the treachery of his wife, and his heart grieved for the loss of his son that was now no more. He determined to be revenged on his wife, and to bring her back into the wood, and there tear her into many pieces in place of only 2. But how to bring her back? He assumed his original shape of a young bridegroom, making of course due allowance for the number of years that had passed since his marriage, and next morning went to his father-in-law's house. His brothers-in-law and his wife saw from a distance the deceitful form he had assumed, and devised means to kill him. Meanwhile, the tiger Brahmin approached his father-in-law's house, and the old people welcomed him. The younger ones too ran here and there to bring provisions to feed him sumptuously, and the tiger was highly pleased at the hospitable way in which he was received. There was a ruined well at the back of the house, and the eldest of the brothers placed some thin sticks across its mouth, over which he spread a fine mat. Now, it's usual to ask guests to have an oil bath before dinner, and so his 3 brothers-in-law requested the tiger to take a seat on the fine mat for his bath. As soon as he sat on it, the thin sticks, being unable to bear his weight, gave way, and down fell the cunning tiger with a heavy crash. The well was at once filled in with stones and other rubbish, and thus the tiger was effectually prevented from doing any more mischief. But the Brahmin girl, in memory of her having married a tiger, raised a pillar over the well and planted a tulsi shrub on top of it. Footnote: a fragrant herb held in great veneration by the Hindus, Osimum sanctum. This herb is sacred alike to Shiva and Vishnu. Those species specially sacred to Shiva are Ven Tulasi, Siru Tulasi, and Siva Tulasi. Those to Vishnu are Sen Tulasi, Karun Tulasi, and Vishnu Tulasi. End of footnote. This story is told to explain the Tamil proverb Summa irikiraya Suruvattai Kaattatuma, which means be quiet or I shall show you my original shape. End of the Brahmin girl that married a tiger.
The Blue Belt, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15 from East of the Sun and West of the Moon, Old Tales from the North by Asbjørnsen et al. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jerome Masters. The Blue Belt by Peter Christian Asbjørnsen and Jørgen Engebretsen Moe. Once upon a time there was an old beggar woman who had gone out to beg. She had a little lad with her, and when she had got her bag full, she struck across the hill towards her own home. So when they had gone a bit up the hillside, they came upon a little blue belt which lay where the two paths met, and the lad asked his mother's leave to pick it up. "No," she said, "maybe there's witchcraft in it." And so, with threats, she forced him to follow her. But when they had gone a bit further, the lad said he must run aside a moment out of the road, and meanwhile his mother sat down on a tree stump. But the lad was a long time gone, for as soon as he got so far into the wood that the old dame could not see him, he ran off to where the belt lay, took it up, tied it round his waist, and lo! He felt as strong as if he could lift the whole hill. When he got back, the old dame was in a great rage, and wanted to know what he had been doing all that while. "You don't care how much time you waste, and yet you know the night is drawing on, and we must cross the hill before it is dark." So on they tramped, but when they'd got about halfway, the old dame grew weary, and said she must rest under a bush. "Dear mother," said the lad, "mayn't I just go up to the top of this high crag while you rest, and try if I can't see some sign of folk hereabouts?" Yes, he might do that. So, when he had got to the top, he saw a light shining from the north. So he ran down and told his mother. "We must get on, mother. We are near a house, for I see a bright light shining quite close to us in the north." Then she rose and shouldered her bag and set off to see, but they hadn't gone far before there stood a steep spur of the hill right across their path. "Just as I thought," said the old dame. "Now we can't go a step further. A pretty bed we shall have here." But the lad took the bag under one arm and his mother under the other, and ran straight up the steep crag with them. "Now don't you see that we're close to a house? Don't you see that bright light?" But the old dame said those were no Christian folk, but trolls, for she was at home in all that forest far and near, and knew that there was not a living soul in it, until you were well over the ridge and come down on the other side. But they went on, and in a little while they came to a great house which was all painted red. "What's the good?" said the old dame. "We daren't go in, for here the trolls live." "Don't say so, we must go in. There must be men where the lights shine so," said the lad. So in he went, and his mother after him, but he had scarce opened the door before she swooned away, for there she saw a great stout man at least 20 feet high sitting on the bench. "Good evening, grandfather," said the lad. "Well, here I've sat 300 years," said the man who lived on the bench, "and no one has ever come and called me grandfather before." Then the lad sat down by the man's side, and began to talk to him as if they'd been old friends. "But what's come over your mother?" said the man, after they had chatted a while. "I think she swooned away. You'd better look after her." So the lad went and took hold of the old dame and dragged her up the hill along the floor. That brought her to herself, and she kicked and scratched and flung herself about, and at last sat down upon a heap of firewood in the corner. But she was so frightened that she scarce dared to look one in the face. After a while, the lad asked if they could spend the night there. "Yes, to be sure," said the man. So they went on talking again, and the lad soon got hungry and wanted to know if they could get food as well as lodging. "Of course," said the man, "that might be got too." And after he had sat a while longer, he rose up and threw 6 loads of dry pitch pine on the fire. This made the old hag still more afraid. "Oh, now he's going to roast us alive," she said in the corner where she sat. And when the wood had burned down to glowing embers, up got the man and strode out of his house. "Heaven bless and help us, what a stout heart you've got," said the old dame. "Don't you see we've got amongst trolls?" "Stuff and nonsense," said the lad. "No harm if we have." In a little while back came the man with an ox so fat and big the lad had never seen its like, and he gave it one blow with his fist under the ear, and down it fell dead on the floor. When that was done, he took it up by all the 4 legs and laid it on the glowing embers, and turned it and twisted it about until it was burnt brown outside. After that he went to a cupboard and took out a great silver dish and laid the ox upon it. And the dish was so big that none of the ox hung over on any side. This he put on the table, and then he went down into the cellar and fetched a cask of wine, knocked out the head, and put the cask on the table, together with 2 knives, which were each 6 feet long. When this was done, he bade them go and sit down to supper and eat. So they went, the lad first and the old dame after, but she began to whimper and wail, and to wonder how she should ever use such knives. But her son seized one, and began to cut slices out of the thigh of the ox, which he placed before his mother. And when they had eaten a bit, he took up the cask with both hands, and lifted it down to the floor. Then he told his mother to come and drink, but it was still so high that she couldn't reach up to it. So he caught her up, and held her up to the edge of the cask while she drank. As for himself, he clambered up and hung down like a cat inside the cask while he drank. So, when he had quenched his thirst, he took up the cask and put it back on the table, and thanked the man for the good meal, and told his mother to come and thank him too, and, afeard though she was, she dared do nothing else but thank the man. Then the lad sat down alongside the man and began to gossip, and after they had sat a while, the man said, "Well, I must go and get a bit of supper too." And so he went to the table and ate up the whole ox, hooves and horns and all, and drained the cask to the last drop, and then went back and sat on the bench. "As for beds," he said, "I don't know what's to be done. I've only got 1 bed and a cradle, but we could get on pretty well if you would sleep in the cradle, and then your mother might lie in the bed yonder." "Thank you kindly, that'll do nicely," said the lad, and with that he pulled off his clothes and lay down in the cradle. But, to tell you the truth, it was quite as big as a 4-poster. As for the old dame, she had to follow the man who showed her to bed, though she was out of her wits for fear. "Well," thought the lad to himself, "'twill never do to go to sleep yet. I'd best lie awake and listen how things go as the night wears on." So, after a while, the man began to talk to the old dame, and at last he said, "We two might live here so happily together, could we only be rid of this son of yours." "But do you know how to settle him? Is that what you're thinking of?" said she. "Nothing easier," said he. At any rate, he would try. He would just say he wished the old dame would stay and keep house for him for a day or 2, and then he would take the lad out with him up to a hill to quarry cornerstones, and roll down a great rock on him. All this the lad lay and listened to. Next day the troll, for it was a troll clear as day, asked if the dame would stay and keep house for him for a few days, and as the day went on, he took a great iron crowbar, and asked the lad if he had a mind to go with him up to the hill and quarry a few cornerstones. With all his heart, he said, and went with him. And so, after they'd split a few stones, the troll wanted him to go down below and look after cracks in the rock. And while he was doing this, the troll worked away and wearied himself with his crowbar till he moved a whole crag out of its bed, which came rolling right down on the place where the lad was. But he held it up till he could get on one side and then let it roll on. "Oh," said the lad to the troll, "I see now what you mean to do with me. You want to crush me to death, so just go down yourself and look after the crags and refts in this rock, and I'll stand above." The troll did not dare do otherwise than the lad bade him, and the end of it was that the lad rolled down a great rock, which fell upon the troll and broke one of his thighs. "Well, you are in a sad plight," said the lad as he strode down, lifted the rock, and set the man free. After that, he had to put him on his back and carry him home, so he ran with him as fast as a horse and shook him so that the troll screamed and screeched as if a knife were run into him. And when he got home, they had to put the troll to bed, and there he lay in a sad pickle. When the night wore on, the troll began to talk to the old dame again, and to wonder how ever they could be rid of the lad. "Well," said the old dame, "if you can't hit on a plan to be rid of him, I'm sure I can't." "Let me see," said the troll. "I've got 12 lions in a garden. If they could only get hold of the lad, they'd soon tear him to pieces." So the old dame said it would be easy enough to get him there. She would sham sick and say that she felt so poorly nothing would do her any good but lion's milk. All that the lad lay and listened to, and when he got up in the morning, his mother said that she was worse than she looked, and she thought she should never be right again unless she could get some lion's milk. "Then I'm afraid you'll be poorly a long time, mother," said the lad, "for I'm sure I don't know where any is to be got." "Oh, if that be all," said the troll, "there's no lack of lion's milk, if we only had the man to fetch it." And then he went on to say how his brother had a garden with 12 lions in it, and how the lad might have the key if he had a mind to milk the lions. So the lad took the key and a milking pail and strode off, and when he unlocked the gate and got into the garden, there stood all the 12 lions on their hind paws, rampant and roaring at him. But the lad laid hold of the biggest and led him about by the forepaws and dashed him against stocks and stones till there wasn't a bit of him left but the 2 paws. So when he got home, they lay down outside the house with their forepaws on the doorsill. "Now, mother, you'll soon be well," said the lad when he went in, "for here's the lion's milk." He had just milked a drop in the pail. But the troll, as he lay in bed, swore it was all a lie. He was sure the lad was not the man to milk lions. When the lad heard that, he forced the troll to get out of bed, threw open the door, and all the lions rose up and seized the troll, and at last the lad had to make them leave their hold. That night the troll began to talk to the old dame again. "I'm sure I can't tell how to put this lad out of the way. He's so awfully strong. Can't you think of some way?" "No," said the old dame. "If you can't, I'm sure I can't." "Well," said the troll, "I have 2 brothers in a castle. They are 12 times as strong as I am, and that's why I was turned out and had to put up with this farm. They hold that castle, and round it there is an orchard with apples in it, and whoever eats those apples sleeps for 3 days and 3 nights. If we could only get the lad to go for the fruit, he wouldn't be able to keep from tasting the apples, and as soon as ever he fell asleep, my brothers would tear him in pieces." The old dame said she would sham sick, and say that she could never be herself again unless she tasted those apples, for she had set her heart on them. All this the lad lay and listened to. When the morning came, the old dame was so poorly that she couldn't utter a word but groans and sighs. She was sure that she should never be well again unless she had some of those apples that grew in the orchard near the castle where the man's brothers lived. Only she had no one to send for them. Oh! The lad was ready to go that instant, but the 11 lions went with him. So, when he came to the orchard, he climbed up into the apple tree and ate as many apples as he could, and he had scarce got down before he fell into a deep sleep. But the lions all lay round him in a ring. The 3rd day came the Troll's brothers, but they would not come in man's shape. They came snorting like man-eating steeds, and wondered who it was that dared to be there, and said they would tear him to pieces so small there should not be a bit of him left. But up rose the lions and tore the Trolls into small pieces, so that the place looked as if a dung-heap had been tossed about it. And when they had finished the Trolls, they lay down again. The lad did not wake until late in the afternoon, and when he got on his knees and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, he began to wonder what had been going on, when he saw the marks of hooves. But when he went towards the castle, a maiden looked out of the window who had seen all that had happened, and she said, "You may thank your stars you weren't in that tussle, else you must have lost your life." "What? I lose my life? No fear of that, I think," said the lad. So she begged him to come in that she might talk with him, for she hadn't seen a Christian soul ever since she came there. But when she opened the door, the lions wanted to go in too, but she got so frightened that she began to scream, and so the lad let them lie outside. Then the two talked, and the lad asked how it came that she, who was so lovely, could put up with those ugly Trolls. She never wished it, she said. 'Twas quite against her will. They had seized her by force, and she was the king of Arabia's daughter. So they talked on, and at last she asked him what he would do, whether she should go back home, or whether he would have her to wife. Of course he would have her, and she shouldn't go home. After that they went round the castle, and at last they came to a great hall where the Troll's 2 great swords hung high up on the wall. "I wonder if you're man enough to wield one of these," said the princess. "Who, I?" said the lad. "'Twould be a pretty thing if I couldn't wield one of these." With that he put 2 or 3 chairs atop of the other, jumped up and touched the biggest sword with his fingertips, tossed it up in the air and caught it again by the hilt, leapt down, and at the same time dealt such a blow with it on the floor that the whole hall shook. After he had thus got down, he thrust the sword under his arm and carried it about with him. So, when they had lived a little while in the castle, the princess thought that she ought to go home to her parents and let them know what had become of her. So they loaded a ship, and she set sail from the castle. After she had gone, and the lad wandered about a little, he called to mind that he'd been sent out on an errand thither, and had come to fetch something for his mother's health. And though he said to himself, "After all, the old dame was not so bad that she's all right by this time," still he thought he ought to go and see how she was. So he went and found both the man and his mother quite fresh and hearty. "What wretches you are to live in this beggarly hut," said the lad. "Come with me up to my castle, and you shall see what a fine fellow I am." Well, they were both ready to go, and on the way his mother talked to him, and asked how he had got so strong. "If you must know, it came of that blue belt which lay on the hillside the time when you and I were out begging," said the lad. "Have you got it still?" asked she. Yes, he had. It was tied around his waist. Might she see it? Yes, she might, and with that he pulled open his waistcoat and shirt to show it to her. Then she seized it with both her hands, tore it off, and twisted it around her fist. "Now," she cried, "what shall I do to such a wretch as you? I'll give you one blow and dash your brains out." "Far too good a death for such a scamp," said the Troll. "No, let's first burn out his eyes and then turn him adrift in a little boat." So they burned out his eyes and turned him adrift in spite of his prayers and tears. But, as the boat drifted, the lions swam after, and at last they laid hold of it and dragged it ashore on an island, and placed the lad under a fir tree. They caught game for him, and they plucked the birds and made him a bed of down, but he was forced to eat his meat raw, and he was blind. At last, one day, the biggest lion was chasing a hare which was blind, for it ran straight over stock and stone, and the end was it ran right up against a fir tree and tumbled head over heels across a field right into a spring. But lo! When it came out of the spring, it saw its way quite plain, and so saved its life. So, thought the lion, and went and dragged the lad to the spring, and dipped him over head and ears in it. So, when he had got his sight again, he went down to the shore and made signs to the lion that they should all lie close together like a raft. Then he stood upon their backs while they swam with him to the mainland. When he reached the shore, he went up into a birchen copse and made the lions lie quiet. Then he stole up to the castle like a thief to see if he couldn't lay hands on his belt. And when he got to the door, he peeped through the keyhole, and there he saw his belt hanging up over the door in the kitchen. So he crept softly in across the floor, for there was no one there. But as soon as he'd got hold of the belt, he began to kick and stamp about as though he were mad. Just then his mother came rushing out. "Dear heart, my darling boy, do give me the belt again," she said. "Thank you kindly," said he. "Now you shall have the doom you passed on me." And he fulfilled it on the spot. When the old troll heard that, he came in and begged and prayed so prettily that he might not be smitten to death. "Well, you may live," said the lad, "but you shall undergo the same punishment you gave me." And so he burned out the troll's eyes and turned him adrift on the sea in a little boat, but he had no lions to follow him. Now the lad was all alone, and he went about longing and longing for the princess. At last he could bear it no longer. He must set out to seek her. His heart was so bent on having her, so he loaded 4 ships and set sail for Arabia. For some time they had fair wind and fine weather, but after that they lay wind-bound under a rocky island. So the sailors went ashore and strolled about to spend the time, and there they found a huge egg, almost as big as a little house. So they began to knock it about with large stones, but after all they couldn't crack the shell. Then the lad came up with his sword to see what all the noise was about, and when he saw the egg, he thought it a trifle to crack it. So he gave it one blow, and the egg split, and out came a chicken as big as an elephant. "Now we have done wrong," said the lad. "This can cost us all our lives." And then he asked the sailors if they were men enough to sail to Arabia in 24 hours if they got a fine breeze. Yes, they were good to do that, they said. So they set sail with a fine breeze and got to Arabia in 23 hours. As soon as they landed, the lad ordered all the sailors to go and bury themselves up to the eyes in a sandhill so that they could barely see the ships. The lad and the captains climbed a high crag and sate down under a fir. In a little while came a great bird flying with an island in its claws, and let it fall down on the fleet and sunk every ship. After it had done that, it flew up to the sandhill and flapped its wings so that the wind nearly took off the heads of the sailors, and it flew past the fir with such force that it turned the lad right about, but he was ready with his sword and gave the bird one blow and brought it down dead. After that he went to the town, where everyone was glad because the king had got his daughter back. But now the king had hidden her away somewhere himself, and promised her hand as a reward to anyone who could find her, and this though she was betrothed before. Now as the lad went along he met a man who had a white bear skins for sale, so he bought one of the hides and put it on, and one of the captains was to take an iron chain and lead him about, and so he went into the town and began to play pranks. At last the news came to the king's ears that there never had been such fun in the town before, for there was a white bear that danced and cut capers just as it was bid. So a messenger came to say that the bear must come to the castle at once, for the king wanted to see its tricks. So, when it got to the castle, everyone was afraid, for such a beast they had never seen before, but the captain said that there was no danger unless they laughed at it. They mustn't do that, else it would tear them to pieces. When the king heard that, he warned all the court not to laugh. But while the fun was going on, there came one of the king's maids and began to laugh and make game of the bear. The bear flew at her and tore her so that there was scarce a rag of her left. Then all the court began to bewail, and the captain most of all. "Stuff and nonsense," said the king. "She's only a maid. Besides, it's more my affair than yours." When the show was over, it was late at night. "It's no good your going away when it's so late," said the king. "The bear had best sleep here." "Perhaps it might sleep in the ingle by the kitchen fire," said the captain. "Nay," said the king, "it shall sleep up here, and it shall have pillows and cushions to sleep on." So a whole heap of pillows and cushions was brought, and the captain had a bed in a side room. But at midnight the king came with a lamp in his hand and a bunch of keys and carried off the white bear. He passed along gallery after gallery, through doors and rooms, upstairs and downstairs, till at last he came to a pier which ran out into the sea. Then the king began to pull and haul at posts and pins, this one up and that one down, till at last a little house floated up to the water's edge. There he kept his daughter, for she was so dear to him that he had hid her, so no one could find her out. He left the white bear outside while he went in and told her how it had danced and played its pranks. She said she was afraid and dared not look at it, but he talked her over, saying that there was no danger if she only wouldn't laugh. So they brought the bear in and locked the door, and it danced and played its tricks. But just when the fun was at its height, the princess's maid began to laugh. Then the lad flew at her and tore her to bits, and the princess began to cry and sob. "Stuff and nonsense," cried the king. "All this fuss about a maid. I'll get you just as good a one again. But now I think the bear had best stay here till morning, for I don't care to have to go and lead it all along those galleries and stairs this time of night." "Well," said the princess, "if it sleeps here, I'm sure I won't." But just then the bear curled himself up and lay down by the stove, and it was settled at last that the princess should sleep there too, with a light burning. But as soon as the king had well gone, the white bear came and begged her to undo his collar. The princess was so scared she almost swooned away, but she felt about till she found the collar, and she had scarce undone it before the bear pulled his head off. Then she knew him again, and was so glad there was no end to her joy, and she wanted to tell her father at once that her deliverer was come. But the lad would not hear of it. He would earn her once more, he said. So in the morning, when they heard the king rattling the posts outside, the lad drew on the hide and lay down by the stove. "Well, has it lain still?" the king asked. "I should think so," said the princess. "It hasn't so much as turned or stretched itself once." When they got up to the castle again, the captain took the bear and led it away, and then the lad threw off the hide and went to a tailor and ordered clothes fit for a prince. And when they were fitted on, he went to the king and said he wanted to find the princess. "You are not the first that has wished the same thing," said the king, "but they have all lost their lives, for if anyone who tries can't find her in 24 hours, his life is forfeited." Yes, the lad knew all that. Still he wished to try, and if he couldn't find her, 'twas his lookout. Now in the castle there was a band that played sweet tunes, and there were fair maids to dance with, and so the lad danced away. When 12 hours were gone, the king said, "I pity you with all my heart. You're so poor a hand at seeking, you will surely lose your life." "Stuff!" said the lad. "While there's life there's hope. So long as there's breath in the body there's no fear. We have lots of time." And so he went on dancing till there was only 1 hour left. Then he said he would begin to search. "It's no use now," said the king. "Time's up." "Light your lamp, out with your big bunch of keys," said the lad, "and follow me whither I wish to go. There's still a whole hour left." So the lad went the same way which the king had led him the night before, and he bade the king unlock door after door till they came down to the pier which ran out into the sea. "It's all no use, I tell you," said the king. "Time's up, and this will only lead you right out into the sea." "Still 5 minutes more," said the lad, as he pulled and pushed at the posts and pins, and the house floated up. "Now the time is up," bawled the king. "Come hither, headsman, and take off his head." "Nay, nay," said the lad. "Stop a bit, there are still 3 minutes. Out with the key and let me go into this house." But there stood the king, and fumbled with his keys to draw out the time. At last he said he hadn't any key. "Well, if you haven't, I have," said the lad, and he gave the door such a kick that it flew to splinters inwards on the floor. At the door the princess met him, and told her father this was her deliverer, on whom her heart was set. So she had him, and this was how the beggar boy came to marry the daughter of the king of Arabia. End of The Blue Belt in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
The Cock's Kraal in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Fairy Tales from South Africa. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by dmcgott. The Cock's Kraal, a Swazi tale. Once upon a time there lived a great chief who ruled over many thousands of men. The city in which he dwelt was so large that it would have taken you many hours to walk around it, and no one had yet counted the multitude of his cattle. But in spite of his great wealth, he was of so grasping a disposition that he never seemed to have enough, nor did he care whether he gained his ends justly. You shall hear the story of the misfortunes he incurred through the same passion of greed. One day he sent out a party of men headed by his chief Unduna to hunt for otterskins for the royal bodyguard. This regiment was the finest of his army, and he prided himself on its perfect equipment. To show how highly he esteemed the men belonging to it, he allowed them to wear otterskins, the royal fur, and long waving headdresses of ostrich feathers. His bravest son was their commander. No soldiers equaled them in all the land. The hunting party had good sport, travelling for many miles down the river and attacking the otters by night when they assembled under the great rocks. The nights were warm and pleasant, and day after day they followed their quarry till they were far from home and found themselves in a new country. Then in a few hours the weather changed. Clouds came up and covered the hills, and then followed a cold misty rain. It grew colder and colder, and they had no shelter and were drenched to the bone. They tried to light a fire by rubbing 2 pieces of wood together, but the wood was damp and no spark came. They tried flintstones, but the rain had spoilt their tinder. Then they thought of going to a neighbouring kraal and there obtaining fire. But the country round was bare and empty, not a soul was to be seen, and the rain continued to fall heavily. At last they decided to mount a hill and see if any habitation could be found. They ascended the highest point within reach, and far away, in the middle of a great plain, on the other side, they saw a single column of smoke. They all set out at once in the new direction, and at the end of some hours arrived at the gate of a big kraal. Many hundreds of huts stood round the cattle pen, and there were oxen in plenty, and large herds of goats and sheep, but not a single human could they see. The men walked round the whole city, but the only occupants of the huts were fowl of every size and colour. They walked in and out of the doors, and seemed busy and occupied in unimportant affairs. The Nduna grew more and more puzzled. At last they reached the great entrance of the cattle kraal, and there a magnificent golden cock stood on the fence, whence he could survey the whole city. He did not move at their approach, but surveyed them boldly with his bright yellow eyes. "What do you want?" he asked in the tones of a man. The Nduna and his warriors were so surprised that they could not answer for a moment. "Do you seek shelter?" repeated the cock. "If so, my people will help you." "We thank you," said the Nduna. "We only want fire. We are far from home, and have no means of warming ourselves or cooking food." "You shall have all you want," said the cock. "I am a man like yourselves, but a wicked king who is stronger than I has bewitched me and all my people. He was a cannibal, and actually asked for the hands of my daughter in marriage for his sons. I refused to allow them to have anything to do with such a wicked race, whereupon his magicians changed me and all my subjects into cocks and hens." "Can you not win back your old forms?" asked the Nduna. "Only if I overcome a more powerful chief than myself, and that I shall find difficult in my present shape." Then he took the Nduna and his men to 2 beautiful huts, gave them food and drink of the best, and when they departed provided them with a thin stick lighted in the fire, which would smoulder for many hours. The hunting party went back to their otterskins, lighted a fire, and presently returned home with their booty. They related all their adventures to the king, and gave him a full account of the enchanted cock, his beautiful kraal, and his great flocks and herds. The king's greed awoke at once, and then he cried, "What fools serve me! Why did you not take the cattle and come back with them at once? Could you not overcome a few cocks and hens?" "Great king," said the Induna, "there was no order to conquer. Why should we steal from the cock, who gave us all we wanted freely?" "How could you possibly miss such a chance?" said the king. "I will see to the matter myself at once." Then he ordered one of his regiments to start for the cock's kraal forthwith, and waited at home for the expected spoil. His men soon found the path, and after a few days' travelling arrived within sight of the enchanted city. The golden cock was at his usual post at the gate of the cattle kraal. As he saw the regiment approach in battle array, he called all his sheep and cattle and sent them into the kraal. Then he flew to the chief hut, and called to all the fowls who lived in the city. Come out, here are warriors who have come to take your cattle. Come out, and defend your homes." The fowls flew in from their lands in hundreds and thousands, and stood each at the door of their hut. Directly the regiment set foot in the city, each picked out his man and flew towards him, flapping his wings around his enemy's head. In a few minutes each bird had pecked out the eyes of his opponent, and such was their strength and ferocity that but 2 or 3 escaped alive out of the whole regiment. The king was greatly incensed when he heard the news. His blood was up, and he instantly set forth his royal bodyguard, the flower of his army, under the command of his favourite son. They set out, clad in rich otter skins, crowned with long black feathers, each man a perfect warrior. Many long days passed. Every evening at sundown the king looked for the victorious army driving before them great herds of lowing cows, themselves scarcely visible in the clouds of golden dust. But no one came, and the days grew into weeks. At length, one night at dusk, a wretched fugitive arrived, footsore and scarcely able to drag himself along. His plumes were gone. A fragment of otter skins was still about his loins. "Great king," said he with many groans, "I am all that remains of the royal bodyguard." "Is my son also dead?" cried the king in horror. "Great king, the prince is dead, and all our men. No one can stand against the assault of the enchanted fowls. The golden cock spared me alone so that the fate of our warriors might be known. He bade me say he is still ready for you." But the king owned himself beaten. "How can I fight any more?" he said. "My bodyguard is destroyed, and my bravest son killed. Let the cock keep his city and his cattle." As the words fell from his lips, the golden cock and all his men regained once more their rightful shape. They had conquered in fair fight, and now ruled over a great land in happiness and peace. End of Cock's Kraal in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
Babouscka in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Twilight Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Lee Vogler. Babouscka. If you were a Russian child, you would not watch to see Santa Claus come down the chimney, but you would stand by the windows to catch a peep at poor Babouscka as she hurries by. Who is Babouscka? Is she Santa Claus' wife? No, indeed. She is only a poor little crooked, wrinkled old woman who comes at Christmas time into everybody's house, who peeps into every cradle, turns back every coverlid, drops a tear on the baby's white pillow, and goes away very, very sorrowful. And not only at Christmas time, but through all the cold winter, especially in March when the wind blows loud and whistles and howls and dies away like a sigh. The Russian children hear the rustling step of Babouscka. She is always in a hurry. One hears her running fast along the crowded streets over the quiet country fields. She seems to be out of breath and tired, yet she hurries on. Whom is she trying to overtake? She scarcely looks at the little children as they press their rosy faces against the window pane and whisper to each other. Is the Babouscka looking for us? No, she will not stop. Only on Christmas Eve will she come upstairs into the nursery and give each little one a present. You must not think she leaves handsome gifts, such as Santa Claus brings for you. She does not bring bicycles to the boys or French dolls to the girls. She does not come in a gay little sleigh drawn by reindeer, but hobbling along on foot, She leans on a crutch. She has her old apron filled with candy and cheap toys, and the children all love her dearly. They watch to see her come, and when one hears a rustling, he cries, "Lo, the Babouscka!" Then all the others look, but one must turn one's head very quickly or she vanishes. I never saw her myself. Best of all, she loves little babies. And often when the tired mothers sleep, she bends over their cradles, puts her brown, wrinkled face close down to the pillow, and looks very sharply. What is she looking for? Ah, that you can't guess unless you know her sad story. Long, long ago, a great many yesterdays ago, the Babouscka, who even then was an old woman, was busy sweeping her little hut. She lived in the coldest corner of cold Russia, and she lived alone in a lonely place where 4 wide roads met. These roads were at this time white with snow, for it was winter time. In the summer-time, when the fields were full of flowers and the air full of sunshine and singing birds, Babouscka's home did not seem so very quiet. But in the winter-time, with only the snowflakes and the shy snowbirds and the loud wind for company, the old woman felt very cheerless. But she was a busy old woman, and as it was already twilight and her home but half swept, she felt in a hurry to finish her work before bedtime. You must know that Babouscka was poor and could not afford to do her work by candlelight. Presently, down the widest and lonesomest of all the white roads, there appeared a long train of people. They were walking slowly and seemed to be asking each other questions as to which way they should take. As the procession came nearer and finally stopped outside the little hut, Babouscka was frightened at the splendor. There were 3 kings with crowns on their heads, and the jewels on the kings' breastplates sparkled like sunlight. Their heavy fur coats were white with the falling of snowflakes, and the queer humpy camels on which they rode looked white as milk in the snowstorm. The harness on the camels was decorated with gold, and plates of silver adorned the saddles. The saddle-cloths were of the richest Eastern stuffs, and all the servants had dark eyes and hair of an Eastern people. The slaves carried heavy loads on their backs, and each of the 3 kings carried a present. One carried a beautiful transparent jar, and in the fading light, Babouscka could see in it a golden liquid which she knew from its color must be myrrh. Another had in his hand a richly woven bag, and it seemed to be heavy, as indeed it was, for it was full of gold. The third had a stone vase in his hand, and from it the rich perfume which filled the snowy air. One could guess the vase to have been filled with incense. Babouscka was terribly frightened, so she hid herself in her hut, and let the servants knock a long time at her door before she dared open it and answer their questions as to the road they should take to a faraway town. You know she had never studied geography lesson in her life, was old and stupid and scared. She knew the way across the fields to the nearest village, but she knew nothing of all the wide world full of cities. The servants scolded, but the 3 kings spoke kindly to her, and asked her to accompany them on their journey, that she might show them the way as far as she knew it. They told her, in words so simple that she could not fail to understand, that they had seen a star in the sky and were following it to a little town where a young child lay. The snow was in the sky now, and the star was lost out of sight. "Who is the child?" asked the old woman. "He is a king, and we go to worship him," they answered. "These presents of gold, frankincense, and myrrh are for him. When we find him, we will take the crowns off of our heads and lay them at his feet. Come with us, Babouscka." What do you suppose? Shouldn't you have thought the poor little woman would have been glad to leave her desolate home on the plains to accompany these kings on their journey? But the foolish woman shook her head. No, the night was dark and cheerless, and her little home was warm and cozy. She looked up into the sky, and the star was nowhere to be seen. Besides, she wanted to put her hut in order. Perhaps she would be ready to go tomorrow. But the three kings could not wait. So when the morrow's sun rose, they were far ahead on their journey. It seemed like a dream to poor Babouscka, for even the tracks of the camels' feet were covered by the deep white of snow. Everything was the same as usual, and to make sure that the night's visitors had not been a fancy, she found her old broom hanging on a peg behind the door where she had put it when the servants knocked. Now that the sun was shining, and she remembered the glitter of gold and the smell of sweet gums and myrrh, she wished she had gone with the travelers, and she thought a great deal about the dear baby the three kings had gone to worship. She had no children of her own. Nobody loved her. Oh, if only she had gone. The more she brooded on the thought, the more miserable she grew, till the very sight of her home became hateful to her. It is a dreadful feeling to realize that one has lost a chance of happiness. There is a feeling called remorse that can gnaw like a sharp little tooth. Babouscka felt this little tooth cut into her heart every time she remembered the visit of the three kings. After a while, the thought of the little child became the first thought at waking and the last thought at night. One day she shut the door of her house forever and set out on a long journey. She had no hope of overtaking the three kings, but she longed to find the child that she too might love and worship him. She asked everyone she met, and some people thought her crazy, but others gave her kind answers. Had you perhaps guessed that the young child whom the three kings sought was our Lord himself? People told Babouscka how he was born in a manger, and many other things which you children have learned long ago. These answers puzzled the old dame mightily. She had but one idea in her ignorant head. The three kings had gone to seek a baby. She would, if not too late, seek him too. She forgot, I'm sure, how many long years had gone by. She looked in vain for the Christ-child in his manger cradle. She spent all her little savings in toys and candy, as to make friends with the little children, that they might not run away when she came hobbling into their nurseries. Now you know for whom she is sadly seeking when she pushes back the bed curtains and bends down over each baby's pillow. Sometimes, when the old grandmother sits nodding by the fire, and the bigger children sleep in their beds, old Babouscka comes hobbling into the room and whispers softly, "Is the young child here?" Ah, no, she has come too late, too late. But the little children know and love her. 2,000 years ago, she lost the chance of finding him. Crooked, wrinkled, old, sick, and sorry, she yet lives on, looking into each baby's face, always disappointed, always seeking. Will she find him at last? Come, Bossy, here I am with my cup. Come, give me some milk rich and sweet. I will pay you well with red clover hay, the nicest you ever did eat. End of Babouscka in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
How an Ikum woman abandoned one of her twins in the forest, and how it was saved by the hawk. In Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jerome Ware. How an Ikum woman abandoned one of her twins in the forest, and how it was saved by the hawk. Awu was a native woman of Ikum, a town on the right bank of the Cross River, consisting of 5 compounds separate from one another by about half a mile of bush. Awu was a fine girl, but preferred to enjoy herself as she liked rather than to get married, which would mean too hard work. She used to walk from one town to another and attend all the dances and plays, as she was a good singer and dancer. She always wore a cloth of the latest pattern and a silk handkerchief round her head, with plenty of hairs from the elephant's tail around her neck, and strings of beads round her waist. She also wore a piece of black braid tied around each ankle and some rings on her fingers. These are the signs of a girl who is popular with young men. Awu had men friends in every town she visited, but she never stayed long with any of them, being what is called a walking woman. At last she conceived, and when she was about 8 months gone with child, she happened one day to go into the forest to gather firewood to cook her morning food. While she was thus engaged, a branch fell from a tree and hit her on the belly. This immediately brought on her confinement, and she gave birth to twins in the forest. The firstborn was a girl, to whom she gave the name of Arrow, and the second was a boy, whom she named Agbor. When Awu found that she had given birth to twins, she was very much ashamed of herself, and was afraid to take both the babies back to the town, as they would be killed by the people, and she would be turned out of the town and left to starve in the bush. She therefore decided to take the firstborn child, Arrow, back with her, but Agbor she left on the ground underneath a tree. Very soon, after Awu had departed, the driver ants discovered Agbor and quickly covered him, commencing to eat him. The bites of the driver ants made the child cry. All this time, a hawk had been circling around, high up in the air, searching for food, and when he saw Awu had deserted her baby, he swooped down and carried the infant off with him to the top of a high tree. The hawk, seeing what a fine child Agbor was, thought he would try to save his life, and immediately set about removing the ants from Agbor's body. He lit a fire and boiled some water with which he washed the child, and the ants very quickly disappeared. The hawk looked after Agbor until he grew up. One day, Awu sent her daughter Arrow to get her some fire, and Arrow, after wandering about, eventually found herself at the hawk's house, where she saw Agbor sitting down. Arrow was so taken with Agbor's good looks that she continued to stare at him without speaking, until at last Agbor said, "Why do you look at me like that?" But Arrow did not reply, and picked up some fire, continuing to stare at Agbor. Then he repeated his question and added, "Do I resemble either your father or your mother? If so, let the fire you are holding go out." And the fire went out at once. Arrow then took some more fire, and Agbor put the same question to her again. And the fire Arrow was holding went out a second time. This was done 3 times, each time with the same result. Then Arrow ran home to her mother and reported what she had seen, and said what a fine boy Agbor was. When Awu, the mother, had heard about the fire, she knew at once that Agbor must be her son, whom she had deserted and left to die in the forest. She therefore made up her mind that she would go and see him. The following morning, therefore, she rose at first cockcrow and went to the hawk's house, where she found Agbor and took a great fancy to him. Awu wanted to get Agbor away from the hawk and keep him for herself, but did not quite see how it could be done. At last she thought of the porcupine, who was well known throughout the country as a clever and resourceful person, and went to him and told her story. Now, the porcupine was a lot caster, and when he had cast lots, he decided that the best thing that Awu could do was to go to a house and lie down, pretending to be dead. The porcupine told her that if she did this, directly the hawk heard that she was dead, he would send Agbor to his dead mother's side to mourn for her. Then, Awu would be able to seize him. The mother, having paid the porcupine for his advice, went away, and did what she had been told to do. When the hawk heard that Awu was dead, he told Agbor the next day he should go and cry at his mother's side. So, when the morning came, the hawk dressed Agbor up and he started off to cry. When he arrived at the house, Agbor wanted to sit at the head of his mother, but the people who had assembled would not allow this, and told him to sit at Awu's feet, which Agbor did. Directly he sat down, his mother jumped up and seized him, and said she would not let him go again. Very soon afterwards, the hawk arrived on the scene to take Akbar away, but his mother would not part with him. Then the hawk became angry and addressed the people as follows. Here is a walking woman who several years ago gave birth to twins in the forest, and being naturally ashamed of herself, deserted her baby boy and left him on the ground to be eaten by the driver ants. I saved the boy's life and have brought him up and fed him. I now demand that he be returned to me at once. When the people heard this, they said to the hawk, If you will let Awu have her son back, we will give you a slave in his place. But the hawk refused this offer indignantly. Then they offered him cows, sheep, goats, and pigs, all of which the hawk refused with scorn. The people then suggested giving some cocks and hens to the hawk, to which he replied that, although he would not accept them for Akbar, they were getting nearer to what he possibly might accept. At last, the people offered him a large basket of eggs, whereupon the hawk immediately closed the bargain, handed over Akbar to his mother, and flew away with the basket of eggs in his claws. The next morning early, the hawk started off with his basket of eggs and left one egg in every house all around the country until all the eggs in the basket were exhausted. He then returned home in the evening with the empty basket. After a few months had elapsed, the hawk said to himself, The time has now come for me to take my revenge upon the people for taking my boy Akbar from me. So he flew from town to town, taking chickens from every compound. This is the reason why hawks always take chickens wherever they find them. And in those days, the people never thought of making any trouble with the hawk, as he had a right to the chickens. But nowadays, when a hawk swoops down and seizes a chicken, the people shout out and try to kill him, as they have forgotten the story of how the twin child Akbar was redeemed by a basket of eggs. This story was related by a native of Ikum called Abasi. End of How an Ikum woman abandoned one of her twins in the forest, and how it was saved by the hawk, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15. Read by Jerome Ware, San Diego, March 23rd, 2022.
The Monkey and the Turtle, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Philippine Folk Tales by Mabel Cook Cole. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Fatimah Garcia. The Monkey and the Turtle, an Ilocano folk tale. A monkey, looking very sad and dejected, was walking along the bank of the river one day when he met a turtle. "How are you?" asked the turtle, noticing that he looked sad. The monkey replied, "Oh, my friend, I am very hungry. The squash of Mr. Farmer were all taken by the other monkeys, and now I am about to die from want of food." "Do not be discouraged," said the turtle. "Take a bolo and follow me, and we will steal some banana plants." So they walked along together until they found some nice plants which they dug up, and then they looked for a place to set them. Finally, the monkey climbed a tree and planted his in it. But as the turtle could not climb, he dug a hole in the ground and set his there. When their work was finished, they went away, planning what they should do with their crop. The monkey said, "When my tree bears fruit, I shall sell it and have a great deal of money." And the turtle said, "When my tree bears fruit, I shall sell it and buy 3 varas of cloth to wear in place of this cracked shell." A few weeks later, they went back to the place to see their plant and found that of the monkey was dead, for its root had no soil in the tree, but that of the turtle was tall and bearing fruit. "I will climb to the top so that we can get the fruit," said the monkey, and he sprang up the tree, leaving the poor turtle on the ground. "Please give me some to eat," called the turtle, but the monkey threw him only a green one and ate all the ripe ones himself. When he had eaten all the good bananas, the monkey stretched his arms around the tree and went to sleep. The turtle, seeing this, was very angry and considered how he might punish the thief. Having decided on a scheme, he grabbed some sharp bamboo which he stuck all around the tree, and then he exclaimed, "Crocodile is coming! Crocodile is coming!" The monkey was so startled at the cry that he fell upon the sharp bamboo and was killed. Then the turtle cut the dead monkey into pieces, put salt on it, and dried it in the sun. The next day he went to the mountains and sold his meat to other monkeys, who gladly gave him squash in return. As he was leaving them, he called back, "Lazy fellows, you are now eating your own body. You are now eating your own body." Then the monkeys ran and caught him and carried him to their own home. "Let us take a hatchet," said one old monkey, "and cut him into very small pieces." But the turtle laughed and said, "That is what I like. I have been struck with a hatchet many times. Do you not see the black scars on my shell?" Then one of the monkeys said, "Let us throw him into the water." At this, the turtle cried and begged to spare his life, but they paid no heed to his pleadings and threw him into the water. He sank to the bottom, but very soon came up with a lobster. The monkeys were greatly surprised at this and begged him to tell them how to catch lobsters. "I tied one end of a string around my waist," said the turtle. "To the other end of the string I tied a stone so that I would sink." The monkeys immediately tied strings around themselves, as the turtle said, and when all was ready, they plunged into the water, never to come up again. And to this day, monkeys do not like to eat meat, because they remember the ancient story. End of The Monkey and the Turtle in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15. The Hawk and the Hen in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Philippine Folktales by Mabel Cook Cole. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Fatimah Garcia. The Hawk and the Hen, a Visayan folktale. A hawk flying about in the sky one day decided that he would like to marry a hen whom he often saw on earth. He flew down and searched until he found her, and then asked her to become his wife. She at once gave her consent, on the condition that he would wait until she could grow wings like his, so that she might also fly high. The hawk agreed to this and flew away, after giving her a ring as an engagement present and telling her to take good care of it. The hen was very proud of the ring and placed it around her neck. The next day, however, she met the cock, who looked at her in astonishment and said, "Where did you get that ring? Do you not know that you promised to be my wife? You must not wear the ring of anyone else. Throw it away." And the hen threw away the beautiful ring. Not long after this, the hawk came down, bringing beautiful feathers to dress the hen. When she saw him coming, she was frightened and ran to hide behind the door, but the hawk called to her to come and see the beautiful dress he had bought her. The hen came out, and the hawk at once saw the ring was gone. "Where is the ring I gave you?" he asked. "Why do you not wear it?" The hen was frightened and ashamed to tell the truth, so she answered, "Oh, sir, yesterday when I was walking in the garden, I met a large snake, and he frightened me so that I ran as fast as I could to the house. Then I missed the ring, and I searched everywhere, but could not find it." The hawk looked sharply at the hen, and he knew that she was deceiving him. Then he said to her, "I did not believe that you could behave so badly. When you have found the ring, I will come down again and make you my wife. But as a punishment for breaking your promise, you must always scratch the ground to look for the ring, and every chicken of yours that I find, I shall snatch away." Then he flew away, and ever since, all the hens throughout the world have been scratching to find the hawk's ring. End of the story, The Hawk and the Hen, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
The Vigil of Mah May in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Told on the Pagoda, Tales of Burma. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ahana Malik. The Vigil of Mah May by Mabel Cosgrove. Mah May was a little Burmese girl who kept a small stall filled with cheroots in one of the crowded, many-colored streets of Rangoon. There she sat all through the sultry, languorous days, smoking and waiting, with philosophical calm for customers. Now and then a great, big, well-fed-looking Indian would stop and handle her goods, and grumbling perhaps a little, would eventually buy. Or a lean Chinaman in baggy blue trousers would pause and smile and talk a while, or some little naked child would come and beg one for nothing. Or the black coolies, their silver belts glittering in the sunlight, would cluster around and bargain and quarrel among themselves, perhaps in the end throwing her goods back to her with no very complimentary language. Or a chetty, airily attired in scanty white muslin, his shaved head protected by a big cotton umbrella, would come and haggle over the annas as a poor Burman would never dream of doing. Then again, a well-to-do woman of her own race, dressed in silk and with gold bracelets on her wrists, would purchase, but they were always, as Mah May used to say with a shake of her small head, the meanest of all. She was a bright little girl, though very poor, often hungry, and always wretchedly clad. For 2 years past she had squatted behind her tray in the hot, hard, cruel glare when the sun beat on the flat-roofed white houses mercilessly, when even the river, with its forests of ships, seemed to cease to flow, when all things were gasping and weary, and the ghari-walas slept soundly, and the poor lean ponies tried to flick the flies off their backs with their tails, when the Indian shopkeepers stretched themselves on wooden beds just in the shadow of their doorways and snored away, dreaming of rupees and curry, while only the pariah dogs scratched and smelt in the road for something to eat. No one stirred. The drowsy influence of the heat seemed universal. Or on the dull, wet days when the sky was clouded and rain poured down, soaking everything through and through, and the thin-colored dresses clung pitifully round their owners' dark forms, and nobody had time to think of buying as they passed on in the warm, damp, oppressive atmosphere. Still Mah May sat, no matter what the season, rolling her cheroots, cutting betel chews and crooning some little song to herself. At midday, she ate some rice and got a draught of water from a pump not far distant. Often someone was kind and gave her some fruit or a cake. Oftener they were unkind, but oftener still they were indifferent. It was a hard life, very, and she was only 17. Yet was she content. Nature had been her nurse. The sun and the rain had made her what she was, a hardy, honest, upright little soul, envying and hating no one. When the shadows grew long and the green shutters of the shops closed, Mah May rolled up her wares and wended her way homewards through the noisy, many-hued crowds to a miserable wooden hut which stood in dirty yellow water, spanned by a rotten plank, and was situated in one of the poorest and most squalid quarters of the town, a quarter in which poverty, in its most hideous form, stalked. Half-clothed men, women, and children of all ages dwelt together there, and kept life in them as best they could. In the huts there was scarce one piece of furniture, save perhaps a bed or a roll of matting or a ragged parda. The scorpions, the white ants, and the great toads held high revel. Amidst rows, hard words, evil things, cries of little children, and growls of half-starved dogs, Mah May dwelt and was happy. She did not know of any better life than hers. The day passed in the fresh air under the changeless azure of the skies, and the night curled up in a corner of the hut with the purple stars looking down through some chink in the roof. And knowing of any other, it is doubtful if she would have cared to exchange. Makine, a black-browed woman whom Mah May had lived with as long as she could remember, was very good and kind to her in her own way. But she had many children tugging at her skirt, and her life was a very hard one. She was married to an Indian who had nearly all the faults of his by no means faultless race. His past has been bad, his present was even more so. He counted the cost of anything done or undone as small if it only brought in pice sufficient to procure toddy, the hot, horrible, poisonous stuff kept in the little shop by a Chinaman in one of the narrow, tortuous by-lanes of the native quarter. To him it mattered nothing that his children had oftentimes not enough to eat, and that the lines about his wife's patient mouth deepened. The passion for drink possessed him to the exclusion of all other feelings. Stretched on a wooden settle in the crowded, dirty shop that abutted on the still dirtier street, reeking with filth and smells, he passed his time sunk in a semi-conscious stupor. The proprietor looked upon Maula Khan as one of the best customers he had. For him was his smile the sweetest, to him was he most accommodating in the matter of money. Of a day the frequenters of the place were comparatively few, but when the night crept on, Pun Lin lit up his place with many sickly oil lamps, whose light showed up the gaudy signboard with its ill-written toddy shop on it, surrounded by a curious design in Chinese, and drew the human moths around in dozens to smoke, drink, play, and talk. Indian, Burmese, all countries were represented there in that crowded, noisy, dirty place. The babel of many tongues broke on the ear afar off. The neighborhood was a notoriously bad one, so that the fighting and sickening sound of blows that usually ended those gatherings of convivial spirits excited no comment. Even the deep groans from those who, wounded, lay helplessly for many hours gained no sympathy or succor of any kind. Often, but in vain, in the hot, sulphurous nights, Makine had found her way there, and begged of the great coarse brute whom she called husband to return with her. But for a long time past she had ceased to plead. realizing how useless it was. And yet, strangely, with all his drunkenness and cruelty, the faithful soul refused to desert or even see him as he really was. He had been the chosen one of her girlfriend when she, young and pretty, had left her people to wed the stranger out of India. They had deemed her disgraced by the union. They had been well-to-do people and would have married her to one of her own race. Her life had held many bitter, unhappy years, but she was proud in her way, and from her lips no word or moan had ever passed. Children had come and multiplied, and though the wants of such people are very few, often they had not the wherewithal to supply them. But of late years, things had been better for Makine, who had a keen eye for business, had made and saved a little unknown to everyone except Mah May. The money was kept buried away in a teakwood box in a corner of their damp, worm-eaten house. Makine's cherished ambition, trader that she was to open a little shop as many of her class did. A little place filled with miscellaneous articles, pillows, lacquer boxes, wooden trays, crockery, pewter pans, some sandals, and perhaps there was no knowing, that is, if she was lucky, some tamins and silk potsos for the men. There behind it, the proud possessor, she dreamt that she would sit and roll the cheroots and have her children by her, keeping an eye on the younger as they played. This picture Makine often painted to herself. It was her ideal of earthly bliss. She dreamt of it by day and night, but kept it locked up in her own heart. Anything that she could spare from what she made by washing the clothes of her richer neighbors, she put by so carefully, handling it so fondly, storing it so cautiously, grimy brown piece, little silver pieces, one or two soiled, crumpled notes. How often she looked at them and counted them and took them in her lean brown hands. She would start out of her sleep fearing someone had stolen her treasure that represented the scraping together of 2 hard, long years. There was some little history attached to every coin. She remembered how each one was gained, every circumstance of toil or sacrifice through which it was put by. And not a soul knew, not a soul save Mah May and herself. Mah May she could trust. Mah May loved her and was as honest and true as a little dog. Makine never left the box in the house with no one to mind it, for fear it should be taken, though for 2 years gone by it had rested securely and undisturbed in its hiding place. The knowledge of its existence and what in the end it was to accomplish lent a courage to her to bear with the blows, the sickness, and the abject poverty of her surroundings. It upheld her. It lent a brightness to her eyes, a lightness to her feet when they would have been otherwise pitifully weary. When she spoke, there was oftentimes a strange ring of gladness in her voice, for hope, that wonderful strengthener, dwelt with her. As time went on and it wanted but 3 months for the money to be complete, they had been rarely lucky. Mah May had sold well every day. Makine had had much to do. A great content abode with her. Even the morose, savage manner of her husband troubled her but little. The children flew at his approach and hid behind the mud hill close by, or their mother's ragged skirts, or anywhere they could, and she soothed and comforted the little trembling ones as best she could, and on her face was a happy smile. At last, she thought. One warm, clear night, when the sky glittered with stars and a young moon showed against it, Makine made ready to take some silks that she had been washing home. She had promised them, for it was the eve of a great Buddhist feast. It was a long way for her to go, right across the town, but she did not mind. So she cleared up the remains of their evening rice, swept the floor with her straw besom, filled the water chatty standing in the corner afresh, bade Mah May to watch carefully, and Mah May assured her, as she had often done before, that if anyone was ever to find out their secret, the money they should never have, save they killed her first. So Makine took up her bundle and went forth into the radiance of the night. Mah May looked after her until she was out of sight and then squatted down smoking. The hours went by. The lights were put out in the huts. Mah May felt very sleepy and tired where she sat, but she was good. She remained awake, staring out into space. A tall, dark figure stood before her. It was Maula Khan. He had not been home for 2 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his turban disarranged. He stood over her and looked down at her. She trembled a little. She feared him greatly. She stirred uneasily, but nevertheless met his look without flinching. He only uttered one word, and that in a voice which drink had rendered hoarse and thick. "Money," he spoke in Hindustani. "I have none." She answered him in the same tongue. He gave a sort of gurgling laugh. "Look you," he muttered, "I know there is money hidden somewhere. Paise and annas and rupees, and I will have it. I know it. I tell you, I know it." "There is none," the girl replied. She had risen. She had her back to the hole in the wall where the money was. "Give it to me," he cried in a voice of frantic rage. "I do not know who has told you this thing," she said, "but it is not true." She felt chilly with fright. She knew that once his suspicion aroused, he would search till he found. She would be powerless to protect it. Tears dimmed the fond eyes of the child. She knew none better all the toil, privations, and hopes that lay in that poor little box. Yet, what could she do? She was so small and her strength so puny. If he searched, he would find it. Its hiding place was not so secure as to be proof against those cruel fingers. Though all Makine's future lay there, she gave no sign of fear. She kept her ground boldly. He shook her savagely when she stood. She was wondering who could have told him. She watched him with a dull, throbbing brain move unsteadily round the wretched room, groping by the light of the moon, feeling everywhere along the wall for holes, turning over all the things. Then, with a muttered word or two, out he went onto the rafters, made of mud, behind, into a little piece of ground. But there was nothing anywhere. Her breath came a little quicker, a little more freely. Perhaps, after all, but with a bound, he was by her side. He nearly wrenched her slender childish wrists off. "It is here!" he cried in triumph. She set her strong white teeth in his black arm, but with a brutal gesture, he flung her lightweight from him. She fell with a dull, heavy thud. He did not heed her for a while, searching eagerly, thirstily, his eyes glittering with cruel greed. At last he drew it forth triumphantly, the poor little shabby treasure house, and took the money, letting some drop in his haste, hiding it with trembling, feverish hands in his white linen jacket. Then he put the box back and turned to Mah May. He looked. She was very still. He crept nearer and nearer, and his cowardly soul shrank within him. The moonbeams had found her out and fell upon her thin, upturned face. He peered around. He held his very breath. No one was stirring. There was silence everywhere. His dark, aquiline face was as cunning as that of any fox cub. He paused for a second or two. Then, as if a sudden thought struck him, he gathered her up hastily in his arms. She was a little heavy, but he was strong. The river that was drifting outwards to the ocean and the moon were the only things that shared the secret of that night with him, and they guard their secrets well. If Ma May wanted the money, I would have given it to her, for I loved her. She need not have left me, Makine said, with a great sorrow and a sense of desolate despair in her heart, and tears in her honest eyes when Molla Khan told his tale. She never learnt different. She never will, unless, indeed, the day dawns when the sea shall give up its dead. End of The Vigil of Mah May in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
Deer Lake in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Legends of Vancouver. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Krista, Zaleski. Deer Lake by E. Pauline Johnson. Few white men ventured inland a century ago, in the days of the first Chief Capilano, when the spoils of the mighty Fraser River poured into copper-coloured hands, but did not find their way to the remotest corners of the earth, as in our times, when the gold from its sources, the salmon from its mouth, the timber from its shores are world-known riches. The fisherman's craft, the hunter's cunning were plied where now cities and industries, trade and commerce, buying and selling hold sway. In those days, the moccasined foot awoke no echo in the forest trails. Primitive weapons, arms, implements, and utensils were the only means of the Indian's food-getting. His livelihood depended upon his own personal prowess, his skill in woodcraft and water lore. And, as this is a story of an elk bone spear, the reader must first be in sympathy with the fact that this rude instrument, most deftly fashioned, was of priceless value to the first Capilano, to whom it had come through 3 generations of ancestors, all of whom had been experienced hunters and dexterous fishermen. Capilano himself was without a rival as a spearsman. He knew the moods of the Fraser River, the habits of its thronging tenants, as no other man has ever known them before or since. He knew every isle and inlet along the coast, every boulder, the sandbars, the still pools, the temper of the tides. He knew the spawning grounds, the secret streams that fed the large rivers, the outlets of rock-bound lakes, the turns and tricks of swirling rapids. He knew the haunts of bird and beast, and fish and fowl, and was master of the arts and artifice that man must use when matching his brain against the eluding wiles of the untamed creatures of the wilderness. Once only did his cunning fail him. Once only did nature baffle him with her mysterious fabric of waterways and land lures. It was when he was led to the mouth of the unknown river, which has evaded discovery through all the centuries, but which, so say the Indians, still sings on its way through some buried channel that leads from the lake to the sea. He had been sealing along the shores of what is now known as Point Grey. His canoe had gradually crept inland, skirting up the coast to the mouth of False Creek. Here he encountered a very king of seals, a colossal creature that gladdened the hunter's eyes as game worthy of his skill. For this particular prize he would cast the elk-bone spear. It had never failed his sire, his grandsire, his great-grandsire. He knew it would not fail him now. A long, pliable cedar fiber rope lay in his canoe. Many expert fingers had woven and plaited that rope, had beaten and oiled it until it was soft and flexible as a serpent. This he attached to the spearhead, and with deft, unerring aim cast it at the king's seal. The weapon struck home. The gigantic creature shuddered, and, with a cry like a hurt child, it plunged down into the sea. With the rapidity and strength of a giant fish, it scudded inland with the rising tide, while Capilano paid out the rope its entire length, and, as it stretched taut, felt the canoe leap forward, propelled by the mighty strength of the creature which lashed the waters into whirlpools, as though it was possessed with the power and properties of a whale. Up the stretch of False Creek, the man and monster drove their course, where a century hence great bridges were to overarch the waters. They strove and struggled, each for the mastery. Neither of them weakened. Neither of them faltered, the one dragging, the other driving. In the end it was to be a matching of brute and human wits, not forces. As they neared the point where now Main Street Bridge flings its shadow across the waters, the brute leaped high into the air, then plunged headlong into the depths. The impact ripped the rope from Capilano's hands. It rattled across the gunwale. He stood staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The brute had been victorious. At low tide the Indian made search. No trace of his game, of his precious elk-bone spear, of his cedar fiber rope, could be found. With the loss of the latter, he firmly believed his luck as a hunter would be gone. So he patrolled the mouth of False Creek for many moons. His graceful, high-bowed canoe rarely touched other waters, but the Seal King had disappeared. Often he thought long strands of drifting seagrasses were his long-lost cedar fiber rope. With other spears, with other cedar fibers, with paddle blade and cunning traps, he dislodged the weeds from their moorings, but they slipped their slimy lengths through his eager hands. His best spear, with its attendant coil, was gone. The following year he was sealing again off the coast of Point Grey, and one night after sunset he observed the red reflection from the west, which seemed to transfer itself to the eastern skies. Far into the night, dashes of flaming scarlet pushed far beyond the head of False Creek. The colour rose and fell like a beckoning hand, and Indian-like he immediately attached some portentous meaning to the unusual sight. That it was some omen he never doubted, so he paddled inland, beached his canoe, and took the trail towards the little group of lakes that crowded themselves into the area that lies between the present cities of Vancouver and New Westminster. But long before he reached the shores of Deer Lake, he discovered that the beckoning hand was in reality flame. The little body of water was surrounded by forest fires. One avenue alone stood open. It was a group of giant trees that as yet the flames had not reached. As he neared the point, he saw a great moving mass of living things leaving the lake and hurrying northward through this one egress. He stood, listening, intently watching with alert eyes. The swirr of myriad of little travelling feet caught his quick ear. The moving mass was an immense colony of beaver, thousands upon thousands of them. Scores of baby beavers staggered along, following their mothers. Scores of older beavers that had felled trees and built dams through many seasons. A countless army of trekking fur-bearers, all under the generalship of a wise old leader, who, as king of the colony, advanced some few yards ahead of his battalions. Out of the waters, through the forest, towards the country to the north, they journeyed. Wandering hunters said they saw them cross Burritt Inlet at the Second Narrows, heading inland as they reached the farther shore. But where the mighty army of Royal Little Canadians set up their new colony, no man knows. Not even the astuteness of the first Capilano ever discovered their destination. Only one thing was certain: Deer Lake knew them no more. After their passing, the Indian retraced their trail to the water's edge. In the red glare of the encircling fires, he saw what he at first thought was some dead and dethroned king beaver on the shore. A huge carcass lay half in, half out of the lake. Approaching it, he saw the wasted body of a giant seal. There could never be two seals of that marvelous size. His intuition now grasped the meaning of the omen of the beckoning flame that had called him from the far coasts of Point Grey. He stooped above his dead conqueror, and found embedded in its decaying flesh the elk-bone spear of his forefathers, and trailing away at the water's rim was a long, flexible cedar fiber rope. As he extracted this treasured heirloom, he felt the power that men of magic possess creep up his sinewy arms. It entered his heart, his blood, his brain. For a long time he sat and chanted songs that only great medicine men may sing. And as the hours drifted by, the heat of the forest fires subsided, the flames diminished into smouldering blackness. At daybreak the forest fire was dead, but its beckoning fingers had served their purpose. The magic elk-bone spear had come back to its own. Until the day of his death, the first Capilano searched for the unknown river up which the seal travelled from False Creek to Deer Lake, but its channel is a secret that even Indian eyes have not seen. But although those of the Squamish tribe tell and believe that the river still sings through its hidden trail that leads from Deer Lake to the sea, its course is as unknown, its channel is as hopelessly lost, as the brave little army of beavers that a century ago marshaled their forces and traveled up into the great lone north. End of Deer Lake in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
Planting a Pear Tree in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Angela Liao. Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio by Pu Songling. Translated by Herbert A. Giles. A countryman was one day selling his pears in the market. They were unusually sweet and fine-flavoured, and the price he asked was high. A Taoist priest in rags and tatters stopped at the barrow and begged one of them. The countryman told him to go away, but as he did not do so, he began to curse and swear at him. The priest said, "You have several hundred pears in your barrow. I ask for a single one, the loss of which, sir, you would not feel. Why then get angry?" The lookers-on told the countryman to give him an inferior one and let him go, but this he obstinately refused to do. Thereupon the beadle of the place, finding the commotion too great, purchased a pear and handed it to the priest. The latter received it with a bow, and turning to the crowd said, "We who have left our homes and given up all that is dear to us are at a loss to understand selfish, niggardly conduct in others. Now I have some exquisite pears which I shall do myself the honour to put before you." Here somebody asked, "Since you've pears yourself, why don't you eat those?" "Because," replied the priest, "I wanted one of these pips to grow them from." So saying, he munched up the pear, and when he had finished, took a pip in his hand, unstrapped a pick from his back, and proceeded to make a hole in the ground several inches deep, wherein he deposited the pip, filling in the earth as before. He then asked the bystanders for a little hot water to water it with, and one among them, who loved a joke, fetched him some boiling water from a neighbouring shop. The priest poured this over the place where he had made the hole, and every eye was fixed upon him when sprouts were seen shooting up, and gradually growing larger and larger. By and by, there was a tree with branches sparsely covered with leaves, then flowers, and last of all, fine, large, sweet-smelling pears hanging in great profusion. These the priest picked and handed round to the assembled crowd until all were gone, when he took his pick and hacked away for a long time at the tree, finally cutting it down. These he shouldered, leaves and all, and sauntered quietly away. Now, from the very beginning, our friend the countryman had been amongst the crowd, straining his neck to see what was going on, and forgetting all about his business. At the departure of the priest, he turned round and discovered that every one of his pears was gone. He then knew that those the old fellow had been giving away so freely were really his own pears. Looking more closely at the barrow, he also found that one of the handles was missing, evidently having been newly cut off. Boiling with rage, he set out in pursuit of the priest, and just as he turned the corner, he saw the lost barrow handle lying under the wall, being in fact the very pear tree that the priest had cut down. But there were no traces of the priest, much to the amusement of the crowd in the marketplace. End of Planting a Pear Tree in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.
How Two Friends Fell Out. The Spider and the Grasshopper. In Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jerome Ware. How Two Friends Fell Out. The Spider and the Grasshopper. Long ago, the spider and the grasshopper were good friends. Unfortunately, the spider was intensely greedy, and this led to much unpleasantness. Now, the spider wanted to go some distance from his house to marry a wife in a strange country. So he called upon his friend, the grasshopper, to accompany him. They started off together in the morning, before the sun was hot, and when they had gone some little way, the spider said to his friend, "While we are away together, I want you to call me Stranger, and I will call you Dobby. We must not call one another by our proper names, as I do not want people to know who we really are." To this the grasshopper readily consented, little knowing what he was letting himself in for. Shortly afterward they arrived at the first town, and were welcomed by the chief. The grasshopper said he was called Dobby, and introduced his friend as Stranger. The chief then ordered food to be placed before them, but the spider, whilst thanking the chief for his kindness, said, "Surely the custom of the country is, when a stranger arrives in a town, to first of all offer him the peace dish, consisting of dried meat and cola nuts, to show that he is welcome and that there is peace between them." The chief replied, "Yes, there is certainly that custom here. But as I thought you were hungry after your long walk, I ordered the food to be brought at once." He then told one of his slaves to bring the dried meat and the cola. And when it was brought, the spider ate all the meat and cola except 2 nuts, one which he returned to the chief, and the other he gave to the grasshopper, saying, "You must wait, my friend Dobby, for your food, as this meat and cola was brought for the stranger, and your name was not mentioned." Later on, the general supply of food was passed round, a certain amount being set on one side for the strangers. This the spider also eat, saying, "I am sorry, Dobby, but there is no food for you, as this was brought for the stranger, and that is my name." The next day they resumed their journey, and when they arrived at the town where the girl lived, whom the spider was about to marry, he went to his future father-in-law's house, whose name was Tawu, and said, "Tawu, I have come to marry your daughter." Now Tawu had a wife called Osegi, who was a very good-natured woman, which was lucky for the grasshopper as things turned out. When Tawu had embraced his future son-in-law, he ordered a cow to be killed to welcome him. And when the people brought the food, they said, "Here is the stranger's portion." Immediately the spider said to his friend, "Did you hear that, Dobby? Your name was not mentioned. So you have no right to this food, which is all for me, the stranger." But the grasshopper kept quiet and never said a word to anyone, although he was very hungry. The marriage between the spider and Chief Tawu's daughter was celebrated the following day. All the people were called together to dance and play. Guns were fired off in the town, and Chief Tawu killed 4 more cows for the strangers who had come from a distance. The grasshopper longed to eat the food, but did not see how he could manage it, as he was known as Dobby, and his name was never called. The spider therefore ate his own share, and the grasshopper's as well, while the poor grasshopper sat down by himself, feeling very sad and not speaking to anyone. When he had finished the food, The spider went out to dance and play with his new wife, but the grasshopper did not go as he was very hungry and weak, and not feeling at all up to singing and dancing. After he had been alone for a little while, the chief's wife Osegi came in, and seeing the grasshopper looking so miserable, went up to him and said, "Why are you so silent and sad at my daughter's wedding, when all the other people are feasting and dancing?" At this, the grasshopper could contain himself no longer, and burst into tears, saying, "3 days ago, when we left our home, the spider asked me to call him stranger, and said he would call me Dabi. During all this time I have been starving, and am very hungry indeed, as all the food has been brought for the stranger, and the spider has eaten it, because my name is Dabi, and I was never mentioned." Then Oseki said she would tell the people what their proper names were, so that when the food was brought, the grasshopper would have his share. Oseki then went out and gave the necessary orders, and told her slaves to be most particular to call the grasshopper's name the next time there was food, so that he should be able to eat. In the afternoon this was done, but when the spider heard his friend's name called out, he was so angry that he would not eat. The second day the servants did the same, and the spider again refused the food when it was brought. Early in the morning of the third day, the spider told his father-in-law that he was going home, and that he would leave his wife for a time and come back for her later. Tawu then said he would make another feast to celebrate their departure, and that he should like to see his son-in-law dance one more time before he returned home. So the people were called to another play, and the chief milked one more cow for their food. When the food was ready, the spider said to his friend, "Come on, Dabi, let us go and dance." But the grasshopper refused and said, "Now you go and dance, and I will join you later." So the spider went by himself, leaving the grasshopper in their room where the food was. Seeing that there was no one about, he took his outside skin off very quickly and hung it up on a peg on the wall, making it look just like a living grasshopper. He then went out and joined the dancers. When the spider saw the grasshopper had arrived and was busily engaged dancing, being very hungry, he stole off by himself to the room where the food was, and put his hand into the pot. But just as he was going to take out a piece of meat, he happened to look up and saw the skin of the grasshopper, which was so lifelike that it deceived him into thinking that it really was his friend on the wall. So he pulled his hand out of the pot and said, trying to laugh, "It is all right, Dabi, my friend. I was not going to eat anything. I just came in to see what the food was like." He then went out again to where the people were dancing, and to his great surprise he saw the grasshopper, where he had left him, dancing and enjoying himself with some pretty young girls. Spider could not understand how it was that the grasshopper had managed to get back to the play so quickly. But as he saw him there, he was too hungry to trouble much about that, and went back again to get the food he was so much in need of. Everything was quiet when he returned, so he lifted the lid again and took out a large piece of yam, and had only taken one bite when his eye caught the grasshopper's skin, in the same place where he had seen it before. The spider was amazed at this, and thought there must be some juju in it. So he put the yam down and ran out of the house, shouting as he went, "All right, Dabi, I only thought I would like to taste the food to see that it was good." But when he got to the dance, he again saw, to his intense astonishment, that the grasshopper was dancing away as merrily as before. The spider then went up to his father-in-law and asked him to stop the dance, as he wished to go home at once. This was done, and they all went back to the chief's house together. Chief Tawu then gave both the spider and the grasshopper a dog each as a present, and shortly afterwards they started off together on their return journey. After walking a short distance outside the town, the spider was so hungry that he stopped and killed the dog that his father-in-law had given, and very soon had eaten the whole of it. He then tried to get the grasshopper to kill his dog, but he refused, saying, "The dog was given to me by the chief as a present and not for food. I shall take it home with me." When the spider had finished eating his dog, he put the skull of the dog in his bag and asked the grasshopper to go in front of him. Shortly after this, the dog, scenting some game, dived into the bush and very soon returned to the path with a small bushbuck in his mouth. As the grasshopper had gone on in front and had not waited for his dog, the spider took the buck and, having cut its head off and put it in his bag next to the dog's skull, he sat down and ate the body. When he rejoined the grasshopper later in the day, he produced his bag and took out the buck's head and told the grasshopper that his dog's skull was very clever and had killed the buck. Although the grasshopper knew quite well what had happened, he did not say anything, but walked on again in front with his dog as he had done before. That night they slept in the bush, and the next day, when they got near the first town they had passed through when leaving home, the dog again dashed off into the forest and chased a bush cow which he bit very badly in the leg. When they reached the town, the spider told the people that the grasshopper's dog had chased one of the chief's cows and bitten it very badly. This made the people angry, and they all turned out with sticks to beat the grasshopper. But when he saw them coming, he called out to them and soon convinced them that his dog had not bitten the chief's cow, but had chased a bush cow and wounded it badly. He then offered to show the hunters where the place was, and they gladly accepted his offer. The hunters then got their bows and arrows, and having been shown the tracks of the bush cow by the grasshopper, they had little difficulty in tracking it by its blood and eventually killed it. The people then carried the meat back to the town and placed the horns in front of their juju. Half the meat was given to the grasshopper, and the remainder divided amongst the people, the spider getting nothing. When the spider saw this, he was vexed, and told the grasshopper that he did not want him for his friend again. He then set himself to make a net of web in order to revenge himself on the grasshopper, and has ever since lived on insects. End of How Two Friends Fell Out, the Spider and the Grasshopper, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15. Read by Jerome Ware, San Diego, May 5th, 2022.
Jupiter and His Mighty Company in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15, from Old Greek Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ahana Malik. Jupiter and His Mighty Company by James Baldwin. A long time ago, when the world was much younger than it is now, people told and believed a great many wonderful stories about wonderful things which neither you nor I have ever seen. They often talked about a certain mighty being called Jupiter or Zeus, who was king of the sky and the earth, and they said that he sat most of the time amid the clouds on the top of a very high mountain, where he could look down and see everything that was going on in the earth beneath. He liked to ride on the storm clouds and hurl burning thunderbolts right and left among the trees and rocks. And he was so very, very mighty that when he nodded, the earth quaked, the mountains trembled and smoked, the sky grew black, and the sun hid his face. Jupiter had two brothers, both of them terrible fellows, but not nearly so great as himself. The name of one of them was Neptune or Poseidon, and he was the king of the sea. He had a glittering golden palace far down in the deep sea caves where the fishes live and the red coral grows. And whenever he was angry, the waves would rise mountain high, and the storm winds would howl fearfully, and the sea would try to break over the land. The men called him the shaker of the earth. The other brother of Jupiter was a sad, pale-faced being whose kingdom was underneath the earth, where the sun never shone and where there was darkness and weeping and sorrow all the time. His name was Pluto, or Adonis, and his country was called the lower world, or the land of shadows, or Hades. Men said that whenever anyone died, Pluto would send his messenger, or shadow leader, to carry that one down into his cheerless kingdom, and for that reason they never spoke well of him, but thought of him only as the enemy of life. A great number of other mighty beings lived with Jupiter amid the clouds on the mountain top, so many that I can name a very few only. There was Venus, the queen of love and beauty, who was fairer by far than any woman that you or I have ever seen. There was Athena, or Minerva, the queen of the air, who gave people wisdom and taught them how to do very many useful things. There was Juno, the queen of earth and sky, who sat at the right hand of Jupiter and gave him all kinds of advice. There was Mars, the great warrior, whose delight was in the din of battle. There was Mercury, the swift messenger, who had wings on his cap and shoes, and who flew from place to place like the summer clouds when they are driven before the wind. There was Vulcan, a skillful blacksmith who had his forge in a burning mountain and wrought many wonderful things of iron and copper and gold. And besides these, there were many others about whom you will learn by and by, and about whom men told strange and beautiful stories. They lived in glittering golden mansions high up among the clouds, so high indeed that the eyes of men could never see them. But they could look down and see what men were doing, and oftentimes they were said to leave their lofty homes and wander unknown across the land or over the sea. And of all these mighty folk, Jupiter was by far the mightiest. End of Jupiter and his mighty company in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 15.